Hey everyone, I'm Alienation and welcome back to my channel. And today we're starting a new series, The 7 Deadly Sins of Branding, featuring our very own LVMH with the sin of greed. And so when it comes to sin, I'm not necessarily talking about evil per se. Sin actually just means to miss the mark. And so when it comes to this series, I'm talking about how different brands just seem to be missing the mark and not really getting it right when it comes to what their target audience are looking for per se. So I feel like with the latest news of Chinese factories revealing all of the trade secrets when it comes to the fact that these brands are actually making their products in China, a lot of people, including myself, who's someone who loves watching fashion shows and is on a fashion podcast, we're all kind of starting to question, well, what exactly is luxury? I feel like in the past, it was all about the artisan and the theatrics and opulence. Like that's a very big thing when it comes to luxury, at least for myself. And so now we're actually seeing a bit of a turning point. And even with, sorry, even with luxury, I think secrecy and mystery also added to the allure. And so now when you're manufacturers, and I'm sorry, it's like, didn't they like sign a deal or something? Like, I don't know what's going on, but yeah, these manufacturers are speaking out, and it's a good thing because it's ethical and it's raising questions of, well, if you're if you're not treating your manufacturers right or your suppliers and your workers right, now it's more likely than in the past we actually know about it thanks to the likes of TikTok. But at the same time, now we also know how much you're actually paying, what your costs are. And that's also ruining the mystery and the allure. But yeah, I think capitalism has kind of always survived on the asymmetry of knowledge and information between the buyer and the seller. And so now, when there's more parity and symmetry between what the buyer and what the seller knows, it kind of makes it hard to make a profit because it's like, well, you're buying it for this much. Like, why am I paying such an exorbitant price? So yeah, it was just an interesting space. It kind of brings the question, like I said, like, is capitalism ethical? Like, so many things are coming up in my mind right now. At the end of the day, obviously, people need to make a buying and make a living, but when you see the markups, you realize just how far these companies are willing to go just to make a profit. And it's like, to what end at the end of the day? And what am I, as the buyer, really paying for? And is it worth it, essentially? And so when I think about luxury in the past, I've got a picture up here of Alexander McQueen, rest in peace. Um, he was actually one of my favorite fashion designers. I would say that he really brought the theatric aspect to the runway. And when it comes to questioning what does it mean to actually be luxury, I feel like having a runway was one of the markers, and it probably still is one of the markers today of what it means to be a luxury brand, or at least a well-known luxury brand, because at the end of it all, it really is about craftsmanship, and everything else on top of that just adds to the allure and the esteem of the brand. But yeah, when I thought of Alexander McQueen, I knew there was a story to tell, and that's another thing. Like, you can't have a brand if there's no story, and I think a lot of LVMH brands have kind of lost the art of like having a story, sticking to their house codes. It almost seems like they're just now chasing trends all of the time, and in that you lose the essence of self. Whereas back in the past, each house was distinct. You'd go to Versace for the sultry glamour and the lure of the 90s look, and the sequins and the silk. But then at the same time, it's like every season felt like it was fresh and it was current. Whereas nowadays, when I'm watching fashion shows, it is quite hard for me to get through them. Whereas before, I'd have fashion TV on and it'd be like on blast. I'm just enjoying taking in the artistry and the scenery of the rooms. But I feel like, I don't know, when did it start changing? 2015? I can't remember exactly what the exact turning point was, but for a long time, it has felt like the fashion shows are a bit drab. And so when Pharrell Williams was actually appointed as the creative director for LVMH, that was the first time like I really felt joy. And so it was quite fitting that he had that theme song of, joy, joy, unspeakable joy, um, as his runway. Don't mind this. Ooh, hold on. Quick intermission. This happens when you like to just film things off the cuff and live. But yeah, when Joy came on, the alarm rang. Okay, that was important. But yeah, when Joy came on, during that runway, it was like, yeah, I am feeling the joy. And I don't know, it just hasn't I think there has been a bit of a resurgence to the excitement and the, creativity of the big fashion houses, but it's still not like the glory days. I don't know if that's just a thing for everyone as they ages. You just feel like the past is better than the present. I don't know, but it felt like back in the day, each year the shows were just getting better and the stories are well thought out and the venues of the fashion show match the looks, and I just like when things are cohesive, um, but I really do feel like what really came and ruined fashion was corporate greed. Listen, obviously brands need money, but I feel like we see a lot of tension between creative directors and business executives. And when you're constantly seeking the bottom line, or maybe you've seen a certain brand or a certain bag go viral, whether it be within your own house or for another brand, now you're thinking, okay, well, if this brand is making this much money, then yeah, we need to also be making this much money for our bags. And so I guess that people would say that that came into effect because Sex and the City and how Carrie Bradshaw's character, she really popularized the term of a it bag. And it was just by happenstance, like it wasn't planned. But once these fashion brands got their stuff into like movies and cinema, essentially big media and big Hollywood or whatever, they realized, oh wow, like we can really profit. And that's not how luxury started. Luxury didn't start to be something that was, you know, widely popular. I feel like that's almost the antithesis of luxury. And please feel free to let me know in the comments what you think down below, because I really want to have this discussion and see from you guys, like, what do you think luxury is? But to me, if everybody has it, then I don't know if it's a luxury, especially when it comes to branded commodities. And so with fashion houses entering, the cultural zeitgeist and now having the phenomenon of an it bag, I feel like that was almost the beginning of the end, and it wasn't planned. But once executives saw that, it was like, okay, we need to always make sure that, our profit and our bottom line is always increasing. And that incessant need for growth, I mean, growth is natural, but growth isn't linear. And so if you're always searching for it and you do almost anything for it, that's when you can see brands abandoning their core values. And one of the core values of luxury being craftsmanship, you see that going out the window. Or and this is the interesting thing about the China, I don't know if it's China Gate or China Luxury Gate. I don't know if there's a specific term for it, but obviously China does have the craftsmanship. So what we're also seeing is a bit of like colonial, I don't know if it's like colonial erasure, or it's like they don't want to admit that it's not being done in-house in Paris or anywhere in Europe. It's actually an Asian country, but are now the new, I say new, it's not like China haven't been craftsmen before, but they're now the new in place for where you can find real artisans who are still stuck to their crafts, because we know in Europe we've gone through several stages of industrialization, and so that meant anything involving the hands was made redundant, and so it did move to the likes of Asia, such as China or other places. Um, but yeah, it's just very interesting to see. I don't know if this is like a bit of a tangent. I don't know who will be interested in this, but yeah, it was just the constant need for, you know, more and more billions and billions meant that they were looking to reduce their costs by any means necessary. And so the allure of having in-house manufacturers no longer made sense. It's like, well, let's reduce our costs and we can still keep the craftsmanship as it's clearly shown. These manufacturers are saying, hey, our quality is the same, even better, maybe in some cases, as the big fashion brands. We just don't have the big label attached to it. And it's like, well, then why aren't you charging the same as other brands who use these manufacturers who are, just mid-range, like a Zara per se? What actually merits you to have 20,000 bags or 28,000 or $28,000 bags or whatever the prices are? And I don't know if they thought people would care. I don't know if it's also because we're in a recession or like there's a global recession, that people are now really like, well, why would I pay that much? And this is another thing that I was thinking of recently. The fact that we now have second-hand sellers and the whole thrifting has become popular. I can get a Chanel for $500 or £500, as people, like say online. Why would I pay today's prices for quality that's probably less than it was back in the day? And it's like there's just a lot has changed in the atmosphere when it comes to buying, and I don't think fashion houses, as usual, I've really taken into consideration what's going on today. And that's a shame because I believe as a fashion designer, essentially you're a storyteller. And that's why I really had to bring up Alexander McQueen, because he was a storyteller. And that's why I loved watching his runway shows. And a storyteller who releases, new clothing every single season is only as good as they're able to curate and create a story that is relevant to the audience of today. So you can't be a designer in a vacuum. And I think that's why there's always been a bit of a I guess tension between the creative directors and who are like the artists and the business executives. The business executives are looking out into the world and saying, hey, this is what's happening. And the artist sometimes can just get lost in the world of, well, this is what I want to create. And as a designer, you aren't just an artist. Design has to be functional and it has to be, exist within this sphere. So yeah, it's just about striking that balance. But touching on, being someone who's current, I also feel like greed plays out with these fashion houses in the way that they are constantly releasing new collections, new seasons. Again, I've said this before on my podcast that I co-host on. I don't feel like it should be necessary for a fashion house to always be releasing collections, because what else is driving that if not greed? Because at the end of the day, when we look at other artists in other industries, it's almost like no one is, unless your record label is like forcing you or whatever, like no one is really putting out projects like multiple times a year. And then it's just, I just think it's insane. I genuinely think it's insane to put that pressure and demand just to make bottom line. And it's like, you don't have to make that much. Millions should be good. Maybe some years you might get billions. And it's just like the constant need for more and more is what's ruining fashion. And we've seen now that, customers are kind of rebelling and feeling taken advantage of. And I think these fashion brands, especially the likes of Chanel and LVMH, who have been reportedly like hiking up their prices exorbitantly, they're doing this because they want to bring back that sense of exclusivity, because they realize, well, we're not going to stop releasing new products and we're not going to stop opening up new shops. So how can we forcibly create this sense of, exclusivity? Oh yeah, we'll just eye some people out with the price. And it's like, who would want to pay more for something that isn't worth more? And so I have this video highlighted here by this creator that I came across. So it says, made in China, really? Are we the idiots? And that is like, I'm just thinking of it as a business perspective. Like, you don't want your customer to feel like an idiot. Like, no one wants to be made to feel like an idiot. I won't want to buy, I personally wouldn't want to buy from a brand that's making me feel like I'm stupid. And part of the allure of luxury, if I can go back, like I said, it's meant to represent opulence, it's meant to represent prestige, high self-esteem. Nowhere in there is the belief that, I'm an idiot. Like when I read these names, I'm not believing their brand is. When you buy from us or when you buy our products, you will feel like an idiot. But that's what is now being revealed thanks to these Chinese manufacturers, giving out the trade secrets. It's actually making people feel like I'm being taken advantage of. And China are fighting back. I'm seeing reports, or I'm seeing videos, should I say, of a 280-hour visa that will allow people, or visa-free entry into China just for shopping. And this is the thing with globalization. It's like other countries can now fight back. They also have the power, and they can leverage, and people can go directly to the source if if these brands are just using these manufacturers. And I feel like back in the day, there was also this thing of, like China, like everything in China is fake, And even where I'm from in Congolese culture, we have this thing of, oh, like, you bought a Guanzo, like, I'm saying it in the most English accent, but yeah, it was seen as very tacky and taboo to have something with China like associated with it because it's like, oh, that's a fake. But now they've let us know that actually no, it's not fake. It's literally, or for some products, it's probably in the same factory. So the cultural understanding of what made in China means is definitely shifting, and so that's definitely going to affect luxury brands. And even with all that being said, I still feel like there is a place for luxury. And funny enough, I was watching another video of this woman, and so she had her Hermes bag in, the video, and she's like, I know they were like, she was almost trying to justify. She's like, no, but I've seen documentaries. Like, I know Hermes, like, they have their own factories. Like, maybe some of their products are made there, but like, this is quality. Um, I don't think people are going to stop buying luxury. That's my point as to why I bring up this, this video. Because at the end of the day, whether or not this was actually by Maslow or not, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I believe that the need for self actualization, which is the highest need on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, will always exist. The need to, be who you fully are and then essentially express who you fully are. That's never going to change. And no one can walk around, we live in and just tell people who they are. Like, we live in a visual world, and so visual markers and cues to who you are always going to be necessary, and they will always exist. People will always judge off of first impressions. That's just human nature, whether we like to refute it or not. And another interesting thing I saw was that someone said on a comment of one of these videos I was watching for my research, well, why do people buy dupes if they claim not to care about luxury? Like, why wouldn't you just buy just a normal bag? And someone rebutted that and said, well, we're not essentially buying dupes, we're just buying, non-branded items that tend to be inspired by the big fashion houses. I think that is valid, but there are also some people who do, just buy dupes because they want to have the luxury logo without the luxury price. So it just goes to show at the end of the day, like, if you are someone who is considered yourself to be an aesthete, you care about aesthetics, you care about, you know, artistry on a deeper level than some people, and you like to show that through your clothing, then you will always admire luxury. And I do think it stands, as I said before, that runway is probably one of the markers of what makes a luxury brand, but at the same time, craftsmanship and quality really is a big marker of what makes luxury. And so now that the veil has been lifted and we're seeing that these big fashion houses owned by LVMH are just going to factories in China where other brands are going to who don't have the same prices, it's like, well, you are not expressing the value that I have, which states that I care about, quality and craftsmanship. So they will seek out other businesses. So I say all this to say that fashion is in a very interesting space, because the truth has been revealed. It's an opportunity, I guess, for brands who actually stand for the truth to maybe, gain more market share compared to the likes of LVMH. It's a shame because some of the brands that they represent, they're part of like our cultural history. Um, they're in our movies, they're in our TV shows. We've grown up with them in magazines in that sense. So I think in our hearts, if you like fashion, you'll probably always have a tug towards maybe wanting a Chanel bag or a Prada bag or a Prada this, just because that's what you grew up with. And some of them actually do have good designs. Even Alexander McQueen, which now actually belongs to Kering, it's in the Kering group. I don't know if it was before when Alexander McQueen was still alive, but yeah, it's a shame that they just don't get publicized as much. But even within the LVMH group, there are still some good brands. It's just unfortunate that under the umbrella of what is LVMH, we see that greed is running the game, and it's starting to backfire because, like I said, they are now beginning to alienate their customer. And so it's really important that if you are, someone who owns your own brand, to think about, using whether it's a pricing strategy or a marketing strategy, something that pulls the customer in. And I really do believe in pull marketing. Obviously, you have to get your message out there, but pull marketing is very powerful at the end of the day. And aside from just marketing, if your selling strategy, if your pricing strategy is pushing and repelling your customer, then you're just going to continue to see a decline in profits. And we've seen that reportedly and repeatedly with the likes of LVMH brands, even for categories such as the leather goods. And so that's why they're really pushing their makeup brands and their makeup divisions at this moment. And of course, we can't just attribute it just to the mistakes and their actions. It is, of course, like I said, the global recession going on. But even in the midst of that, Hermes sales, I think, rose by I can't remember the exact percentage, but Hermes still sales are still rising because luxury buyers still understand that brands like Hermes are staying true to their values. They do value craftsmanship, and LVMH I think should take a note from their books. And it's quite ironic because there was a time when LVMH actually wanted to buy and acquire Hermes, and it was a long battle as well. And thank God they didn't. Like, thank God, and the Hermes family really fought and stood their ground because there was a sneaky attack by LVMH to silently buy some shares, but they got it back in the end. But yeah, let me know what you think down below in the comments. As usual, I have loved just discussing this because I love fashion and I love talking about brand strategy. And if this, sounds like you, maybe not on such a big scale, but you're trying out strategies and they just seem to be repelling your target customer instead of actually bringing them in, and you want an outside perspective, then feel free to let me know. I have a couple of links down in my bio. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. I'm just loving this series. I cannot wait. I've got a couple more in the books. But yeah, see you.